Hello and welcome to today's 5-in-1 Mayani Talks. This beautiful new topic I have been excited to share with you. It's all about our shared global heritage when it comes to beads and specifically glass seed beads. Now, of course, some of you may already know that we have a very long, rich, deep, and meaningful connection in history when it comes to beads. They were actually our earliest form of adornment. So, as soon as we started to think of ways to dress ourselves from a point of view of beautifying ourselves, perhaps, we used beads to do this, creating pieces of jewelry, clothing, shoes, using beads. And to begin with, of course, it was mostly jewelry, and it would be involving bone and shell beads, and then, of course, later wood beads, glass beads, and as we know, glass seed beads, which are my favorite to work with because of how intricate the workmanship is behind the process, but also how intricate the works of art themselves are when you weave with this type of bead, because there are so many different colors, so many different shapes, so many different sizes available for you to explore and to use to weave together beautiful works of what I'd like to think of as tapestries, almost like the intricacy that you see in a tapestry that is sewn, of course, using thread work. You can do the same thing using beads. Or if you like, painting with beads is another way of I like to look at it. Anyway, so glass seed beads, some of you may already know, have come about 4,000, 5,000 years ago, and they were developed, the particular skill or technique behind which you kind of have that hole in the center of the beads. That particular element was developed in ancient Egypt, but of course, glass seed beads have also originated from ancient Mesopotamia and ancient India. And then they worked their way through ancient trade routes across pretty much every single continent in the world and have woven their way through almost, not quite all, but almost every single culture on our planet as well. Of course, beads have made their way into, I could probably safely say, every single culture on the planet, including those remote tribes that we have not actually come into communication or contact with because of the bone and shell beads that have for a long time held our attention and been used to adorn ourselves. But glass seed beads have made their way into almost every single culture on our planet. So, to break this down, I thought we'd look at continents at a time and look at how glass seed beads have entered those continents or come into contact with those continents through the ancient trade routes, what they've been used for on those particular continents or in those particular continents by the people who lived in those areas. So, of course, beadwork. I've got some notes. It's important to remember that beadwork, glass seed beadwork in particular, has for a long time not just been about artistry and creative freedom of expression for groups of people in particular who never really had much of a voice, historically speaking. So, women, for example, who in more recent times, I'd like to say, because I believe once upon a time we did have more of a voice, but our voice was then taken away across the ages. And so, women have received the ability to creatively and freely express themselves through the use of glass seed beadwork across the ages. But so have communities. Communities have used glass seed beads to beautifully capture their culture, whether it's traditional stories, cultural stories, societal stories, values, and beliefs of the society that people have around them have held. It captures all of that, as well as family narratives too. So glass seed beads have worked their way to capture a whole host of stories that hold a whole host of different meanings, depending upon who is weaving the actual stories using these beads. So they have served as a form of language, if you like, between human beings, and they have served to connect us long before globalization and, of course, colonization, which is not a great way to be connected, but yes, colonization and industrialization connected us. So, yes, they have connected us for a very long time. And that's another reason why I love them so much, because where certain materials, when it comes to the luxury jewelry industry, have a history of segregating us, and I think you know the ones I mean, I'm talking about gold, silver, the precious metals, precious stones, and semi precious stones, they have served, historically speaking, just and even in present times, to segregate us. They create separation because of the high amount of value that these materials hold expense wise. Beads, on the other hand, relatively, they can have a high price tag, but relatively speaking, they're not seen in the same way as precious metals or precious stones are. So they have served to connect us more than they have ever served to segregate us. So without further ado, let's dive into the first continent I wish to explore today and the first 5 facts of this Mayani Talks. You know, it's always 5 facts in one of these videos, and it's one video a week. So, incidentally, I am one video behind, so there'll be a back to back in a moment. I'll be doing the next one. But for this one, we'll explore Africa. So, I've got hair in my way. Um, Africa was my first home continent, for those of you who know me. And in Africa, fact number one, there are very ancient origins when it comes to glass seed beads. Glass seed beads entered Africa as early as 3,000 years ago. And when they made their way across to Africa, this was long before the industrial processes that we now have in place today to create glass seed beads. So these glass seed beads that were making their way into Africa were handmade glass seed beads. And as I say, they entered Africa long before colonization, connecting us with Africa through the ancient trade routes, and long before industrialization, before the whole process of making glass seed beads became more mechanized. So they're very, very ancient, the connection that Africa holds with glass seed beads. And they have been found, when it comes to ancient glass seed beads, we've found artifacts in Egypt, as well as Mali and Nigeria, just to name a few parts of Africa. Fact number two, in Africa, many of these glass seed beads held lots of different meanings, but specifically spiritual meanings and social meanings. So they were used not only to capture events or perhaps rituals that were very spiritual, and beliefs that the people held that were very spiritual, but they also were used to communicate social status, for example. So some of the things you may have seen beadwork art created for were, and depending upon the patterns, the colors that were used, the shapes that were used, they were all used to reflect things like mourning, fertility, marriage, and as already mentioned, social status as well. So they had a very beautiful way of being used amongst African tribes, like the Yoruba tribes, the Zulu tribes, and the Maasai tribes, to communicate different spiritual, social, and cultural stories and meanings. They had meaning behind them. Fact number three, typically speaking, and this doesn't just hold true for Africa, but for a lot of communities and cultures across the globe, women were the primary bead workers. This is definitely true for the Zulu tribes and the Maasai tribes. It's a question mark when it comes to Yoruba tribes. Sometimes it all comes down to how well these records were kept, basically, of these tribes and who did what in those tribes. So, going by what we know, in the Zulu tribes and the Maasai tribes in particular, women were the primary bead workers. They were the ones who would pass down this skill from mother to daughter for generations, keeping the craft form alive, but also with it, keeping those traditions, the cultural stories, the social narratives, the familial narratives alive as they wove pieces with this a particular skill. So they effectively served these beadworks of art that were created as sort of living archives, if you like. The people themselves, the artists themselves, are living archives of identity, and the works of art that they create are, of course, beautiful archives of that identity too. Fact number four. Now, it may be very fascinating for you to know that Venetian beads, which of course were handmade in Venice by Venetian artisans. You may have heard of Murano beads, for example. Murano glass beads are very famous. These glass seed beads, woven or created by Venetian artisans, made their way into Africa as well through the ancient trade routes. And I love this fact because what happened was when these beads came across from Venice to Africa, the local tribes within Africa reimagined them. They used these beads, which are Venetian in the story of their origin and Venetian in the artistry, because the artisans who created them were Venetian. They used them to weave their own cultural stories and narratives, which created very distinctly local, very distinctly sacred and social forms of jewelry, basically. So, what I love about this is that you can essentially take glass seed beads from one part of the world that were created in one part of the world, or perhaps have been used in one part of the world, moved into a completely different part, different culture, and they can be reimagined and rewoven to capture the stories that are important to the people of that new culture. They're just very, very versatile. They don't have to hold one fixed narrative. They can actually fluidly move across different cultures, weaving their way into different cultures and being woven by different cultures to carry different cultural stories. And I think that's a beautiful, I just love that fact because I think in a world where so many of us can find so many reasons to segregate ourselves, so many reasons to look at how we are not connected, I think glass seed beads serve as a beautiful way for us to see just how truly beautifully connected we are and we have been historically as well. I think that's important to remember because a lot of this segregation I feel has arisen in more recent times and it was not necessarily our natural way. And the final fact, fact number five, beads are a form of empowerment. So, as I already mentioned, women are the primary bead workers across many cultures, not just tribes in Africa, but across many cultures around the planet. It's women who have particularly preserved this craft form. They have preserved their heritage through this craft form, but also they have empowered themselves economically through this craft form. It has served as a way for them to support their families. This is definitely true of parts of Africa like Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa, where women continue to be the primary bead workers. They create beaded works of art and use them to basically support themselves, bring themselves an income, at the same time as, of course, preserving their heritage and all the stories that are attached to their skill that they have acquired from many, many generations all the way down the line to them. So I hope you enjoyed today's 5 in 1. I would love to know at the end of all of this if there were any facts that you found particularly insightful or fascinating that you were not aware of. If perhaps this has had you seeing beads in a completely different way, and if you had never really thought of our global heritage when it comes to beads and how beads actually serve to connect us, I'd love to know. I'd also love to know what stories your jewelry would tell if every material woven into your work, your jewelry, every color, every pattern, every position was intentionally arranged and that was intentionally selected to communicate a specific purpose, a specific meaning, specific story. So I'd love to hear from you. Please do feel free to leave a comment. If you enjoyed today's 5 in 1 Mayani Talks, please, I'm still getting the hang of that. Please do hit the like button below. And of course, if you want to be reminded of when my next video is out, the notification bell as well. I look forward to seeing you again soon. I'm Mega of Mayani Jewelry. And remember, because your jewelry should always be more than just an afterthought. Bye for now.